With the first pick. With the second pick. With the third pick. With the fourth pick.
Crashing the boards.
Select.
Hello and welcome to Crashing the Boards, Episode 1, where we'll break down this year's draft class and get you familiar with the future of the NBA. I'm Evan Skilliter, pumped to be with you and very, very pumped and honored to be with Jordan Foote. Man, thank you so much for joining me. Really looking forward to this project. How the heck are you, man?
I'm good, dude. Thanks so much for having me on. We have kind of went back and forth on Twitter and chatted about hoops. I'm like, man, Evan knows what he's talking about. Obviously, we connected through Rashad Phillips. Shout out to him. We're going to use some of his terminology throughout this series to more accurately describe these guys. So really excited to be here, and I think it's going to be a fun series, man.
Jordan, tell the people a little bit about you before we get started. Let's introduce them. This is Episode 1, so let's introduce them to ourselves. Let's start with you.
Sure. So right now I'm finishing up school. I graduate from Baker University in May, studying sports media and sports admin. So I cover the Chiefs for Sports Illustrated right now. I cover the Jazz for 48minutes.com. And then I do some column work for Rashad Phillips and all that stuff. So just trying to get my hand in as many cookie jars as I can right now. And I'm really excited for the NBA draft. And I think that's what brings both of us here for sure.
Yeah, man, really looking forward to it. For all of you who don't know me, I'm Evan Skilliter. I'm in Northwest Ohio. No need to tell you what town because it has 4,000 people and you've likely never, ever heard of it. 2 hours from Detroit, 2 hours from Cincinnati, 2.5 from Cleveland, hour from Columbus. I'm in a good spot to hit all the big cities in the Midwest for the most part. So I'm in the same boat. I cover basketball for Rashad. I do some other scouting work and video consulting for different teams and agents, etc. So really looking forward to getting some of this stuff out there. This is the first time I've really tackled a video review. I often write down my scouting reports, maybe publish it online, but first time I've ever gotten into video. But Jordan, with all the tools that we have right now in this world, internet, synergy, whatever it may be, it seems silly to skip over the video work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't compliment the written part. Because I'm like you, like I can crank out a written report and have all the details. Like we talked before we went on, I write all my notes by hand. Like that's just how I roll. I watch and like there's something about that notebook and pen or pencil or whatever that is just gratifying when you're doing stuff like that. So transferring it into audio platforms for a podcast or video or stuff like that, there's nothing better.
That brings up a good point too. If you are listening to this as a podcast, be sure to check us out on YouTube as well as Instagram. We'll get you those handles soon, but a lot of good video stuff. Obviously, the audio stuff is nice for when you're driving in the car and you can't necessarily watch something. But if you want some clips, you want some actual breakdowns, check out the videos. We'll have plenty of clips of these guys. So we'll get right to it. As we said, this is episode 1, and there are 3 guys that are pretty much consensus top 3 picks. There may be some movement within those top 3, but we're going to cover Cade Cunningham from Oklahoma State, Jalen Suggs from Gonzaga, and Evan Mobley from USC. Most weeks we won't do top 3 picks or the next best guy. We're just going to cover some of our favorite prospects in the draft, but just to get things rolling, to give you a feel for what this show is going to be all about, we're going to cover those 3 top picks. So with that being said, Jordan, let's get into Cade Cunningham. 6'8", 220-pound dual forward. And for anyone that isn't familiar with the term dual forward, you can see the graphic. But our guy Rashad Phillips, as we already mentioned, has given us some different definitions for different player types, and we'll be using those throughout the show. So Jordan Cade averaged 20 points per game, 5.4 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.5 blocks, 43% field goal on field goals, 40% from 3 on 5.7 attempts. Presumably the number 1 pick overall. What are your thoughts on Cade just from the bat?
There's a lot to like, man. I mean, 6'8", kind of people comp him to Luka, and I don't know about you. We probably should have talked about this before. I try to stay away from comps as much as I can because, like, these guys are all different in their own way. And you can say, like, for Mobley, I'll probably bring up there's shades of Chris Bosh, like just a little bit, but I'm not going to say this is his career trajectory. Like they're just two different things. So people bring up the Luka comp and that he's 6'8", 220 pounds. He can kind of control the pace. He's a big bulked up point guard essentially. And I get that for sure. He definitely has the size. He's well built. He's long. He has that 7-foot wingspan. He's just NBA ready. And I think that's what I like about him, because you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a player who can be your primary initiator on offense. He's switchable on defense 1 through 4. Just a really smart, heady player. And he showed at Oklahoma State. The big question mark, I think, was his shooting. He shot 40% on threes. Like, he did pretty well. And do I think he's a 40% three-point shooter? I really don't at the NBA level, but he kind of showed off the bounce. He can pull up. He can do a bunch of different stuff. He took final shots. He was just comfortable being that guy. And I think that that'll help him out in the NBA.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple weeks ago, maybe it was even months ago by now, Bill Simmons had his famous Cade Cunningham quote. He said, "I'm not that impressed with Cade Cunningham. I think he's another guy. The idea of Cade Cunningham is more exciting than actually watching Cade Cunningham." And obviously the scouting community, the basketball diehards all kind of lost their minds about that quote. And while I don't agree with the whole quote, there are actually bits of it that I can kind of understand. I can understand why Bill thinks, why he says, he's just another guy. And I think that's because, first of all, he played for a team that maybe necessarily wasn't the best around him. But Cade does a lot of things well. He maybe doesn't stand out because he's maybe not necessarily a flashy dribbler, although I think he has that in him. He had the ball so much and he had to kind of run that offense. And so you see a guy that, again, can do it all, and maybe not necessarily flashy, but he hits 40% from three. He can hit off the dribble. If he can find his own space, and he's so big that maybe it's not as impressive when he finds that space, but he's still finding that space. Rashad not long ago tweeted a comp to Grant Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at Grant Hill's NBA career, it was just as steady as she goes, all-star all the way through. He's not a guy that you think of when you think of, your favorite players of all time, or, the best shooter of all time, the best passer of all time, the best rebounder. But he was probably one of the best players when it comes to all-around game. And that's what I think makes Cade Cunningham a cannot miss player.
Yeah, absolutely. And people think, and I kind of get bits and pieces of that Simmons quote too, because like we call them question marks because we never want to put a player down, but we do want to bring up stuff that kind of could outline what they do throughout their career, things that could be worked on, could be improved upon. And for Cade, something that could limit him maybe a little bit, I just don't see the elite foot speed. Like, can he switch out onto quicker point guards? And that's a big ask. Like, he brings so much else to the table that if he doesn't have that elite burst or quickness, that's going to be okay. And that there's really, I'm trying to think of how many players, I can't off the top of my head, but elite players have traits, or great players even have traits. Luka has it, LeBron has it, Chris Paul has it. I'm not expecting Cade to become those players, but they can control the pace of the game. They can make you play how they want to play, how fast, how slow. Cade has some of that in him. Like, he can dictate what's going on throughout the game. He's so good on defense. He has the handle. He can make every pass. You can't double him because he can see over it and make that pass across the court. Can he be a championship caliber number one option? Like, it's insane that we have to have these conversations about players who are like 19 years old. Like, Cade is a really can't miss young player who can do everything well. And that's going to mean a lot to an NBA team.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think another knock on Cade, if you can even find one. And again, when we say knock on Cade, we have to remember, like you said, he is 19 years old.
Yeah.
Right. So a knock on Cade doesn't mean he can't develop and improve these things. Some people look at his turnovers per game, 4.04 turnovers per game in his 1 year at college at Oklahoma State. And yeah, that is kind of an alarming number, but not if you watch the tape and you see how often Cade Cunningham has the basketball. He initiates the offense. He has to drive often into into a lane where there are probably 5 guys because his team didn't necessarily space the floor very well. He handled a really, really big load and he did it really well, really, really well. So, I'm not concerned necessarily about the turnovers. I'm looking forward to seeing Cade on an NBA offense with space on the floor. But yeah, if there's a knock on Cade, I guess it's the 4 turnovers a game.
Yeah, and people bring up the 3-point shooting. Like if he's taking more off-ball looks in the NBA, that's going to be better. Like it's if he doesn't have to create his own looks as much and can be with another offensive initiator or a go-to scorer or something like that. He's not a guy like I don't expect Cade to average 25 points a game throughout his career. Like I just don't see that for him, but that doesn't mean he can't be a phenomenal player that impacts the game in so many different ways. Like you really, really, really have to look for anything remotely negative to say anything about this kid. Like he is a fantastic young player. He's going to be great in the NBA. You can't poke holes in his resume. You can't poke holes in his game. He has the size. He has enough athleticism. He's kind of proven everyone wrong at every step of something he can't do. He can't finish at the rim. He can't finish with both hands. He can't shoot, stuff like that. So if he becomes an efficient ball handler who turns the ball over like 2.5 times a game instead of 4, I wouldn't be surprised because he just seems to be that type of player.
I'm with you 100%. So before we move on, let's give a summary. Who is Cade Cunningham?
I think I have written down offensive initiator, dual forward with great defensive upside. That's my one sentence summary.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Well-rounded game. He's going to be a great defender, NBA defense ready as soon as he gets to the league. And he's a can't miss guy. He's a once in a generation type of guy. And I can't wait to see him on the floor.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Jalen Suggs from Gonzaga, 6'4", 205-pound combo guard, 14.3 points per game, 5.3 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 50% from the field, 33% from 3 on 3.4 attempts, averaged 2.9 turnovers to go with those 4.5 assists. I think the numbers say a lot for Jalen. Obviously, this isn't a numbers-based show. This is a scouting show.
Yeah.
We'll roll the tape. You're seeing it now. But Jordan, a guy that's 6'4" and is primarily in that Gonzaga offense, the point guard, the offensive initiator, to see 5.3 rebounds is actually a pretty impressive number that stands out.
And even on the other end, you saw many times last year where he would get up and block like 7-footer shots. Like he's the explosive athlete that has great timing. And I wanted to talk about intangibles because he has all of them. And that's one of those things he's aware of where he's at on the court. He knows where to put other people. He has the leadership. He displays great effort. He dives for loose balls and stuff like that. Those aren't like stuff you hang your hat on as an elite prospect, but those are things that can set you over the top and really exemplify your game. And that does it for Jalen Suggs. And really to see those rebounds is interesting, especially in an offense like that and a team like that at Gonzaga. But the fact that he can play anywhere, he can play on the perimeter and defend, he can get down low and offer a little bit of rim protection, which for a guard like that is pretty insane. And the fact that he's grabbing boards to go with it and then starting the break, making great outlet passes or running down the court himself is fantastic.
I'm with you 100%. Now, when I was rolling through Jalen's tape, when you watch Jalen, just when you're watching a Gonzaga game, you see, like you said, a really strong, a strong player, can do a lot of things physically and athletically, and runs that Gonzaga or ran that Gonzaga offense nearly perfectly. Right. Well, I mean, look at the record, literally nearly perfectly.
Sure.
And that's an NBA style offense, right? Pick and roll heavy, space the floor with guys on the perimeter, and Suggs was phenomenal. But one thing that stood out to me was his ability to run the pick and roll in 2 different ways. He was able to use his athleticism very well to explode to the basket. He's a good finisher, crafty finisher around the rim. You can see that throughout all of his tape as well. But what I really liked was that there were times where Suggs could really slow things down and kind of snake his way through a pick and roll and manipulate the defense and really move things around and get some shots for some of the guys on the perimeter, a couple lobs even. And so when I think about that translated to the NBA, it's something that I haven't seen said a whole lot is that like Suggs, as long as he's good with changing roles within a game, I if they need a bucket, if they need, their point guard to go get a bucket, he'll go get one. He'll get to the
Yeah.
rim, or he'll float one, he did a nice job, developing that floater throughout the year as well, so he can get you a bucket. But if the shot's not falling for him or you have someone else that's hot you're trying to get looks for, I think Suggs is a great option to give the ball to say, "Hey, we need you to distribute. We need you to create some space for these guys, manipulate the defense." He can do that as well. And I think that's what makes him so dangerous and so exciting is that you're getting not just a scoring point guard. I mean, we're calling him a combo guard, right? He
Sure.
can do a lot of different things, but you're getting a guy that can slow things down and if you need to change the pace of the game or whatever it may be, Suggs is your guy to turn to.
Yeah, and it's winning basketball. Like, even with Cade, people are hung up on, can these guys be number one options on championship teams, which is not a fair way to measure young prospects like that. And it shouldn't be discounted that Jalen Suggs can play on and off the ball. He can fill any role you ask him to. That is a plus. And if he falls to a team that uses him correctly, he's going to be a perfect player for them. He can literally do anything they want offensively, defensively. He's smart. He makes right decisions. He can shoot. He We'll talk about question marks here in a second, I'm sure. I think there's one thing he can do better, finishing with the ball at the rim. But overall, he just does so many things right that you can't really pick anything that's wrong. And he's going to slot into pretty much any role on the court. He can space, he can attack the rim, he can make all the passes, he can play off the ball and create space or serve as a spacer. I mean, there's nothing to not like about Jalen Suggs.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right with the finishing at the rim. And that's another thing I go back to. These guys are 19 years old.
Yep.
And as they go, I mean, you can see he can find the space, right? He has the strength to get through guys. He has the quickness to get to the rim. And I think as the game starts to slow down for him, I do think that trait will develop. He will become a pretty good finisher. And another question mark while we're on the topic, I think is his 3-point shooting consistency.
Mhm.
We mentioned at the top 33% from beyond the arc, but he's the kind of guy he was a streaky shooter at times, right? He would get hot. He would have games. I think he had like a 7 for 10 game from beyond the arc at one point, something along those lines. And then he'd turn around and maybe make 1 of 8 the next day, right? Um, if he is playing off the ball, you do hope that 3-point shot can develop, and he can become kind of a space creator for his squad and for himself too, right? I mean, if he can become dangerous beyond the 3-point line and get guys to close out hard, I promise you he's going right around them, man. So hopefully he can develop that 3-point consistency. We've seen the ability in him to hit from deep consistently, but not for long stretches. So I guess we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and if people close out hard on him and he gets past them, he doesn't necessarily even have to embrace that physicality at the rim, because someone, I forget who it was, well, probably several people have comped Tyrese Halliburton in that he can
Mm.
play on and off the ball, and that's a decent comp, I'd say. But Suggs has flashed a lot more of that pull-up mid-range jumper, and that he can take it and make it. He can be a 3-level scorer where it's not just, oh, I'm going to snake my way through and then dish it off to somebody or attack the rim. It's, I can pump fake, jab step, or create my space, whatever. Or if you close out too hard on me, I can pull up and hit one in your face in the mid range, which people always have their qualms with the mid range shot. It's a layup if you grind. And that's just how it goes. And Jalen Suggs, he flashes that potential to be able to take that shot. And everything you add to your game makes everything else a little bit easier. They can't hone in on one thing. And he's so well rounded that he's going to have his pick of the litter in terms of moves and opportunities to create in the NBA.
Absolutely. All right, Jordan. So we'll ask it again. Who is Jalen Suggs?
I've got a versatile two-way guard as possibly a second option, but I think that he can be trusted in pretty much any role you slot him into.
Perfect. Perfect. I will say no more. Well done. On that, and we will move on to Evan Mobley, 7 feet tall, 205-pound hybrid post. Peep the graphic on the screen for what a hybrid post is. 16.3 points per game, 8.6 rebounds, 2.3 assists, 2.8 blocks, 57% from the field, 30% from three on 1.2 attempts. We'll talk about the 3-point shooting just a little bit. And for what it's worth, 69% free throw shooter. Jordan, I gotta say one thing here before we start talking about Evan's game. Obviously, a great first name in Evan, right? But he is my favorite player of all drafts because when I was a baby, my dad would lay me in the crib, and the little mobiles that would spin around on top for the babies to look at, right? My dad started calling me Mobile Child, and that somehow was boiled down to Mobley. So
Huh.
my name is Evan. My nickname growing up was Mobley, and no one gives a crap that that's the case other than me and maybe my dad. But I wanted to tell the story anyway. I'll probably have an Evan Mobley jersey and maybe a collection by the time his career is over, just for that reason. But Jordan, let's talk about Evan just a little bit. I'll kick it off. I mean, obviously, what stands out is his defense, right?
Yeah.
He's a mobile defender. He's 7 feet tall. He can block shots, right? 2.8 blocks per game. But we've seen him switch often. We've seen him able to stay in front of smaller guards, but also with that length, he's able to recover and protect the rim if they're able to get around him. And I'm really excited to see him defensively, especially in a pick and roll heavy NBA.
Yeah, I can tell this series is going to be great because literally Mobley's my favorite player in this class, I think at the top at least. And the first point I was going to make was defense. So it's tremendous. He has the length, he has quick feet, he can move around, he can step out and defend the pick and roll. You can't poke holes in his defensive resume other than potentially his strength, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But the foundation is there for him to be like, I might sound crazy, but like an all NBA caliber defender.
Oh
Like
yeah.
there's
Oh yeah.
definitely potential for that to happen, I think.
Yep, absolutely. And you know, normally we save question marks for later, but since we're talking about defense, we'll just get right into it.
Sure.
Um, he is slender, right? 205 pounds for a 7 footer is small. For instance, Anthony Davis was 6'10 coming out of college, and he was like 222. So he still
Yeah.
had 15 pounds on Mobley, and we called Anthony Davis small when he was coming out of Kentucky. So yes, he is. He could use some size. He could use some strength. Guys like Jokic, Embiid, some of the bigger post players that have a nice post repertoire, probably going to push him around on the block. But that doesn't mean you can't hide him,
Sure.
right? And he could play a four role, right, with next to a big five that can
Mhm.
defend the rim a little bit better, perhaps. And we'll just say for the meantime, because who knows how much weight he can put on. Yeah, he doesn't have the widest shoulders. He might not be able to hang a ton of weight, but we've seen some really skinny guys come into this league and grow and become strong defenders inside as well. So yes, I mean, the sky's the limit defensively for Mobley, and I don't think his size should scare people away one bit.
I don't think so either. And you can view the flip side of that coin. Not only will he become a complete defender if he adds a little bit of weight, he'll also develop more of a post up game because
Mhm.
that's also a question mark where you can say, right now he didn't really even need it in college because he was just so good at everything else. I don't think he'll need it right away in the NBA. A lot of guys don't. They just don't thrive off of that or need it in their game. There's just so much potential here. Like it's insane that he's already such a fun player to watch and does so many things well. But if everything clicks, you're looking at a premier big in the NBA, which is a guy that maybe a couple teams could pass on in the draft. It's just mind blowing that he's not like a consensus number one overall pick. That speaks to some of the really fun players we have at the top this year.
For sure, for sure. And then we haven't really touched on his offensive game. We'll get into it
Sure.
just a little bit. In fact, none of my notes revolve around his offense, which is a crime, really, right? Like he stands out so much on defense, but offensively, um, like we said, maybe he could develop some interior post moves,
Mhm.
but the dude's a dynamic roller, right? I mean, he
Yeah.
catches lobs. His catch radius is incredibly wide. Um, he can. I know we talked about 30% from three. He's shown the ability to shoot from deep. He could probably be a pick and pop guy at some point in his career, but on the short roll, if he catches it on the elbow and turns and faces up, I could see him kind of developing sort of an Anthony Davis in terms of, the short corner or dunker spot, whatever you want to call it, the elbow game, the face-up game. He's got a quick jab. He's got some moves to get to the rim. Maybe needs to tighten up the handle a little bit, but what 7 foot 19-year-old doesn't need to tighten their handle a little bit, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to him offensively. I think the game could get polished up a little bit, but the upside is just tremendous.
And he just has a feel for the game that you can't understand unless you went and watched his tape, because you look at his assist numbers, 2.4 a game, whatever. You look at the tape, man, his teammates didn't always do him a ton of favors in the system at USC, always didn't do that. It's almost like he was trapped sometimes, where he literally was trying to do so much, or had these, he could see like one step ahead of where everybody else was going. Like, he thinks so quickly, he processes quickly, he delivers accurate passes with velocity. He's a guy that can handle the ball and be a little bit of an offensive creator. I think not relied upon like a Bam where you're just forcing him to run everything, but he has some shades of that in him where he can do a little bit of everything. Even in the pick and roll, he can do the dump off passes. He can find the guys that are open, and there's so much potential. Like, he can get better at so much stuff that it's insane. And really, he can find soft spots in the defense, whether he has the ball, looking to score or pass. He doesn't have tunnel vision. There's just so much to like about him.
Yeah, then that's the other note that I had written down, was that he just seems like a tremendous teammate, like a guy
Yeah.
that you want to get the ball to, because you know that you can get it back if you work hard to get open. So again, Evan Mobley, fantastic player. Jordan, summarize.
All right. We've got premier big with offensive centerpiece potential and all NBA defensive potential if everything falls right.
There you go. Love it. Awesome. Well, those are our three guys for this week. Again, the show is not meant to be a mock draft. It's not meant to rank players necessarily. We picked these three to kick things off because they're well covered, and we didn't want to spend a ton of time on them, but also didn't want to look over them because they're great players. Jordan, any final thoughts?
Man, I think it was fun. It's always easier, I guess, to talk about the guys that everybody knows about, because the book's out on all of these guys. There's nothing crazy that we're bringing to the table, but I think it's fun to just go beyond the box score, because you can put numbers into the spreadsheet and you can do all that stuff. If actually sitting down and watching these players is a joy, it's not like we're gonna come in and bash on guys. That's not the point of the show, and there's enough out there that does that. There's so much young talent in this draft that I'm super excited to just break it all down, man.
Absolutely. And again, if you're listening to this as a podcast, we're glad that you are, but be sure to check us out on YouTube. Check out the film, check out the footage. We got plenty of clips of these guys that we're excited for you to see, and to add some context to what we were saying. And again, thank you for tuning in. You can see us right back here next week as we break down international prospect Josh Giddey, Colgate's Jordan Burns, and Pepperdine's Colby Ross. Jordan, before we get out of here, where can people find you online?
Yep. Follow me at Footnoted, FOOTENOTED, on pretty much anything. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I can't believe I said Facebook, like people still use that. But if you do, go ahead and do that. I'm out there.
Awesome. You can find me on all those as well at Evan R. Skilliter. And we'll see you back here next week for episode 2 of Crashing the Boards.
With the second pick. With the third pick. With the fourth pick.
Crashing the Boards.
Select.